guys, it's Cobra, and this is my first episode in a series I'm going to be starting entitled Sega versus Nintendo. Now, because this is the first video, let me go through and sort of explain what everything is. Basically, what I'll be doing is I'll be taking a game that was released both on a Sega console and a Nintendo console, and we'll compare the two, and in the end of the episode, I'll announce a winner. That's basically how it's going to work. The consoles can range from the Sega Master System and the NES, the Genesis and the Super Nintendo, the Game Gear and the Game Boy, although not too many games were similar, were jointly released on those two consoles. There were some, but I don't have any. Anyway, I think that's where I'm going to stop because I do not have a Dreamcast or a Saturn. I have a Nintendo 64, but I don't have either of the Sega systems. So that's basically the rundown. So the first episode, the game that I'm going to do for the first episode is going to be Doom. Now, Doom is on the Super Nintendo and the Sega 32X, which is a Genesis add-on, of course. So I feel like it counts. Anyway, and what we'll be doing is I'll be showing you gameplay footage of both, commenting, and then in the end announcing a winner, like I said. So let's just talk about the packaging real quick before we actually get into the game. Two completely different type of packages. Let's start with the Super Nintendo version. Super Nintendo version is just a typical Super Nintendo case. It does have the Super FX chip in it, but it's just a typical box with all the goodies inside. In the back shows 4 gameplay footages and gives you the technical mumbo jumbo over here, and then the storyline sort of here. Let's look at this one, the 32X version. It's a slide case like this, much easier to get out. And while the picture is slightly smaller, it's much more defined and detailed. The Doom picture here is much more red and cluttered and pixelated, sort of. This is like completely great. It looks really good, especially compared to the Super Nintendo version. And if you look on the back, it's got gameplay again. All this. It says 24 meg here. This is only 16. It says 16 megs. So right off the bat, Sega's looking good. And this is the same stuff that's pretty much on the Super Nintendo, slightly different, but if you notice in the back, you probably won't be able to see it on camera. In fact, you won't be able to, but it's white. But in the background, you can see a faint drawing of a demon, and it's this demon here, I believe, with its tongue out. So that's the difference in the casing, and so far, I'm really liking the Super Nintendo's casing. But as far as the game itself looks, the actual cartridge itself, well, this is nice. It's just pretty plain. The Super Nintendo cartridge is red. I won't get it out, but maybe if the Super Nintendo had better packaging, I would be able to get it out. But again, I think the Super Nintendo has a slightly more maybe appealing cartridge, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with the 32X version. So round 1 with the package goes to the 32X. Now let's check out some gameplay of the Super Nintendo version. Alright everybody, this is Doom on the Super Nintendo. So I just started up, no difficulty setting or anything. That's odd. One thing you notice right off the bat, the controls are sluggish. The environments look rather pixelated. I know this is Doom and it's hard to nitpick, but the game doesn't look great. And I can just imagine once I have to shoot an enemy what it's going to be like. One good thing though is that the L and R button act as the strafing button. Listen to that music though, that music is almost flawless. The lighting is pretty poor here too. as I look around and mess with the buttons, I don't see any button that is run unless it's... So that's level 1 of Doom. As I hope you saw, you know, it's sluggish, it's laggy, the music is great, but that doesn't really help in the fact that the game just doesn't look good. And it's hard to play almost, especially if you've played the PC version. Huh. And apparently the game glitches up randomly. Well, I guess that's the end of this video. Next we're going to take a look at the Sega 32X version. Alright guys, this is Doom on the Sega 32X. Let's readjust the camera a little bit. Okay, this is the startup screen. There was a screen prior to this, but it was just the Doom guy and the Doom logo, nothing fancy. So this one actually has a start screen, and I can choose my difficulty, which seemed to be missing from the other one. I couldn't do it. We'll go Hurt Me Plenty. Not too tough, but not too easy. There's a loading screen. Okay, now the music is appallingly bad. I'll be honest. It's the Genesis's sound chip isn't great, but wow, does this game run smooth and look great? I mean, this one feels so much better than the Super Nintendo version. It's almost disgusting. The enemies at a distance look slightly pixelated, but then again, this is Doom. But overall, the environments might not be as detailed and the lighting might be lacking, but the game looks better. And it also has that stone border around it. A lot of people hate that, and it doesn't really bother me, but I think it helps the game because it does make the screen slightly smaller, so it does look slightly more detailed. Now, if you're wondering about controls with the Genesis controller, it only has 3 buttons, so how does that work? Well, basically, B is shoot, A is your action button, I'm sorry, C is your action button, and A is the button you hold to run. So overall, I'm giving the controls right now to the Sega version. I mean, they're so easy to learn. And, I mean, compared to the Super Nintendo, also you can strafe. Now, because the Super Nintendo has the L and R button, it is slightly more difficult to do it on the Genesis controller. It is easier on the Super Nintendo with L and R. But with the Genesis controller, all you have to do is hold C and then left or right. That's all you do. It's very simple. And I'm gonna go about another couple minutes, but I just want you to like get a picture of this game. This looks fantastic. Like, for being on a Sega Genesis, this is impressive. And I know it's the 32X, and yeah, that gets a lot of heat, but this plays near to the PC. It doesn't look nor sound quite as good, but the playability of it is great. I mean, anybody could notice that this is Doom right off the bat. You know, if you're playing the Super Nintendo version, sometimes it's sort of like, yeah, this is Doom, but, you know, the technology wasn't there. And I feel like with the Sega 32X, it almost was here. Alright, let's just grab this weapon. Now, the levels are basically the same. This version has slightly fewer levels than the Super Nintendo version, which is a downfall. But in the end, you know, there's no save feature, so unless you planned on beating the game in one sitting, that's not a big deal. So far, the Super Nintendo has a few things better. One, the music. I mean, the music in here is not great. But, you know, that's not a huge problem. And so, everybody, this is Doom on the Sega 32X. Now, stay tuned, and I'm going to give my final thoughts and judge and verdict the winner. Alright, guys, so there you have it. There you have the Doom version, Doom on the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis 32X. Overall, you know, the Doom version has great music. You know, it has some more levels, and the title screen's much better. But the graphics are bad, the controls are lackluster at best, and it just doesn't run very well. You know, the Super Nintendo's not very it wasn't meant for Doom, you know. And then you go over to the 32X version. Now, what does the 32X version have? It has great graphics, great control, and it looks like Doom. You know, it feels and looks like Doom. What is it lacking? Ooh, it's lacking music big time. The Super Nintendo has great music. Genesis version definitely is lacking, and that's because of the Genesis sound chip. Everybody knows it has a slightly, excuse me, mediocre sound. Um, and it also has fewer levels, but like I said earlier, it's not that big of a deal when you think about it because there is no save feature, nor is there a password system. So unless you planned on beating all original levels of Doom, which I think there's somewhere around 30, in one sitting, uh, it's not really a big deal that there's only like 15 levels. You know what I mean? For you to sit down and beat the whole game of Doom in one sitting is it's ridiculous to think, and even more ridiculous to try. So the fact that there's only 15 levels, it's a shorter version of Doom, but you get the feel and you get everything. Overall, what is the winner? Well, I think if you've been watching the video, it's pretty clear that the Sega Genesis 32X version is superior. There's no arguing the fact that the Nintendo version, Super Nintendo, just wasn't ready. It wasn't ready. You know, it doesn't play well. It doesn't look very good. So in the end, if you have a Sega 32X or a Super Nintendo and you want Doom, get the 32X version. You heard it here. Alright guys, so this is Cobra, and this has been my first Sega versus Nintendo video as far as games go. Go ahead and send me, leave comments, messages, anything of games you want me to do in the future, and we'll see what I can do. Alright guys, thanks, and stay tuned for future episodes. And this is my first episode in a series I'm going to be starting entitled Sega versus Nintendo. Now, because this is the first video, let me go through and sort of explain what everything is. Basically, what I'll be doing is I'll be taking a game that was released both on a Sega console and a Nintendo console. And we'll compare the two, and in the end of the episode, I'll announce a winner. That's basically how it's going to work. The consoles can range from the Sega Master System.
Let's rock.
Hey guys, it's Cobra. We actually get into the game. Two completely different type of packages. Let's start with the Super Nintendo version. Super Nintendo version is just a typical Super Nintendo case. It does have the Super FX chip in it, but it's just a typical box with all the goodies inside. In the back shows 4 gameplay footages and gives you the technical mumbo jumbo over here, and then the storyline sort of here. Let's look at this one. The 32X version, its episode is going to be Doom. Now, Doom is on the Super Nintendo and the Sega 32X, which is a Genesis add-on, of course. So I feel like it counts. Anyway, and what we'll be doing is I'll be showing you gameplay footage of both, commenting, and then in the end announcing a winner, like I said. So let's just talk about the packaging real quick before we in the NES, the Genesis and the Super Nintendo, the Game Gear and the Game Boy, although not too many games were similar, were jointly released on those two consoles. There were some, but I don't have any. Anyway, I think that's where I'm going to stop because I do not have a Dreamcast or a Saturn. I have a Nintendo 64, but I don't have either of the Sega systems. So that's basically the rundown. So the first episode, the game that I'm going to do for the first episode